Hey folks, Colin here from Sumthins Recording, and today I wanted to show you how I use Arturia's Rev Plate 140 or their 140 plate emulation when I'm mixing. We're looking at Arturia's 140 plate today, but before we dive in, if you're ready to go a little bit deeper into the mixing process as a whole and really start to hone your workflow as an engineer, then I have just the thing for you. It is my 7-step mixing checklist. It's a simple PDF guide that will walk you through the entire mixing process, step by step, to help you get professional and radio-ready mixes without any more hassle and without any more of the guesswork. It is completely free, and you can download it below using the link in the video description. Now let's jump in here and take a look at this plate reverb. A little disclaimer here, most of you might know this, but I am a huge proponent of using the stock plugins inside your DAW. I do believe that you can get great mixes using only stock plugins, and they're a great learning tool. It's very difficult to learn how to get great mixes if you're just buying a bunch of great plugins, hoping the plugins do the work for you, because they really can't compensate for not having the mixing skills. So I'm a big proponent of using stock plugins, and I do use the stock plugin, the stock reverb inside of Studio One a lot of the time. I have this plugin, I got it a long time ago when they ran it for free for a few weeks, and I used it a lot back then on my mixes. I did switch back to using the stock reverb inside of Studio One when I trimmed out all my bought plugins a couple years ago now, but I recently downloaded it back for a Van Halen tracking session because it emulates the 140 plate that Sunset Sound has, the EMT 140. So I recently downloaded it again, and I wanted to show you guys a couple examples of using this plate. So I like using it on snare drum, which is what they sent when they were tracking Van Halen 1. They would send the snare drum to the plate. Now, I'm also going to show you what I used to do, which is setting the vocal to this plate reverb. It's a very pretty reverb with a couple different settings that we're going to go over. Let me play you the mix as it stands. No reverb on the vocal, and the only reverb we have on the drums is the room reverb. So here's how our mix is sounding at the moment. I think we'll start by sending the snare drum to the reverb. So we'll dial in a snare drum reverb. I just have the 140 plate just pulled in here. Oops. So these are the default settings it comes up as when you just drag it in. It comes up as the EMT 140 plate. You have a drive knob here, which we'll mess with, especially on snare drum. We'll probably drive it a little bit, see what we can get. And we have 3 modes. We have punchy, the classic EMT, and then a modern version of it. We'll start with classic and we'll see what punchy and modern sound like. For snare drum, let's go as short as we can. So let's do a 1 second plate. I don't want to do a 0 second. We'll start with 1 second decay time. We have the blend all the way up. You also have a width control, which is pretty cool. We can narrow the reverb if we want, which is something I do with my room reverb. I narrow it up to about 50%, so it's not so wide and unnatural sounding. And then on the bottom here, we have a section for pre-delay, which I love using pre-delay on vocals. We have a high-pass filter, which is awesome. So let's dial the high-pass filter up to about 250 or so. Get rid of any of that low end. We have an EQ here, which is awesome. I'm not going to use that at the moment. I may use it to dial down some of the top end here, but we'll get there in a moment. It's nice that they're both shelves, and there's also a modulation section, which is very cool, especially with vintage reverbs. It's cool to have some modulation on it. Let's send our snare to the reverb here. Start messing with it a little bit. So we'll solo up our snare drum first and see if we need to tweak the reverb at all. Interesting. Those are quite different. So classic EMT sounds like a traditional sounding vintage reverb to me. The modern version was very tight, which I like. That was nice. It really tightened up the sound quite a bit. And then the punchy version really pushed it out front. I like that. We're going to try both of those as we mix it in with our snare drum here. Only thing I did there was I tested out the different decay times. I like it at 1, and then I pulled the width back to about 70% there, so it wasn't so wide sounding. I don't think we needed to pull the high pass filter up, but we'll mess with that as we put it in with our snare drum. So let's put our snare drum back in, and we'll mess with each model here. We're going to go with the punchy mode there. I like that. I might trim out a little bit more of the low end here. So we'll roll it up to about 300 there. I like the attack we get from the punchy mode. Let's put it in with our entire drum kit now. So you're here with our room mic in, and we'll pull it in and see if we can get a good balance with it. Wow, that adds quite a bit of attack to the snare drum. That's really nice. Let's try it on one more mode. I'm going to switch it over to the classic EMT and see what we get here. That's a little bit more conservative. I would probably go with that in the mix. If I was going to use that punchy mode, I would probably mix into that. So get my drum sound going and then send it to the reverb on that punchy setting, so I don't have as much attack as I want before I send it to the reverb and then end up with overkill on the attack. But that's really nice there. I'm digging that. Let's nuke it and try it on the vocals. So we'll send it back to, I guess, the regular EMT setting. And then we'll switch over here, get rid of it on our snare drum, and we'll send our vocals into it. So I have both pairs of vocals sending it to it. We're going to start with just the lead vocal here, and we'll mute our backgrounds for the moment. Put it back up to 0. Now for vocals, I'd probably shoot for something similar to what I use normally. So we'll start with the classic EMT. We'll do 2 seconds. Full width, full blend. I don't need the equalizer at the moment. We'll put the high pass up to about 250 to start. And then we'll dial up the pre-delay to 152. Cool. So long pre-delay I like to use on my vocals. That way the reverb's not fighting the vocal. They're not happening at the same time, competing for space. We'll try the couple models, see what they sound like on the vocal. You can see it changes the time. That's interesting. And we'll mess with the drive here on the vocals and see what kind of tones we can get. Have it sent to the reverb. I'm going to solo up the reverb to start, and we'll see what kind of sound we have coming just from the reverb here. to try it there with the drive all the way up. So it dialed up the high pass filter to 300, got rid of some of that low mid area. It was a little heavy sounding. Tried the different models. The modern one sounded a little too tight to me. It sounded like the room was smaller, and I didn't like that. And I didn't want to lengthen it. It was just giving me a weird vibe that I wasn't crazy about. The punchy mode was a little bit too much for vocals. It gave us too much mid-range on the vocal, which I wasn't crazy about there. The classic EMT sounded great to me. No equalization. Didn't feel I needed to pull the width in. Blend is right where it was. When I pulled the drive up, I really like that. All the way up, cranked to, what's it at, 6 dB there. Feels like it evens out the vocal, so it's not blowing up the reverb on bigger notes and then chilling out on quieter notes. We're going to try that with the drive all the way up. We'll put the vocal back in, just the vocal and the reverb now, and see what we get.
Care, don't you care? 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 Don't you care?
That sounded good. Let's put it in the whole mix here. That's really nice. Very smooth sounding. No need to trim off the highs, which is something you get from more digital sounding reverbs, like the stock reverb in Studio One. I usually have to roll back the highs a little bit, which is why I have an EQ following my reverb. I usually roll off the low end. I don't think I went as far on my digital reverb. They're both digital, they're both plugins, but I don't think I went as far on the stock plugin. So this gives you a little bit more low end, which is fine. You can always roll the high pass filter up a little bit more. But I didn't feel the need to pull a low pass filter in or anything like that, which I like. I love that you have control over the width as well as the blend. The modulation section is pretty nice. I haven't messed with that at all in the time I've used the plugin. This drive, though, on vocals, that's fabulous. Gives you a nice even sound on the vocals. So instead of pulling in a compressor to try and even out the reverb so it's not blowing up on louder notes and then disappearing on quieter notes, having the ability to drive the reverb harder is really, really nice. Pre-delay is always, always welcome, especially on vocals. And the 3 settings is nice to have. So for drums, if you need a little bit more attack, putting it on the punchy setting, or if you need something tighter with a snare drum, or a smaller room for acoustic guitars, being able to put it on that modern setting, which felt tighter to me, is very, very nice. And then, of course, classic EMT there. I hope that was helpful for you, or an interesting little demo for you to see. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if you're ready to take your mixes to the next level and start dialing in your workflows in Engineer, then I have just the tool for you, and it is completely free. It is my 7-step mixing checklist, and you can download it below to start creating more professional mixes in less time. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.